So, what if I told you that the most powerful substance on Earth, the stuff that literally fuels our entire civilization and can even start wars, what if I told you it got its big break as a fake miracle cure? Yeah, seriously. Today, we're diving into the absolutely wild story of oil. It's a journey that starts in a pretty bizarre place and ends up with secret deals and consequences that shape, well, everything. You really can't make this stuff up. The modern oil industry didn't start with some brilliant engineer or a savvy CEO. Nope, it started in a medicine bottle. Back in the 1840s, there was this businessman, Samuel Keir, and he had a problem. His salt wells kept getting gummed up with this nasty, black, smelly goo. But instead of just tossing it, he got a crazy idea. He bottled the stuff up, slapped a label on it, calling it rock oil, and sold it as a patent medicine that he claimed could cure pretty much anything. I mean, cholera, asthma, you name it. Total fraud, of course. But here's where the story takes a turn. From that completely ridiculous beginning, this miracle cure actually went on to perform a real miracle. It became the fuel for the Industrial Revolution, the ultimate prize in global politics, and the bedrock of our entire modern economy. So the question is, how on earth do you get from snake oil to black gold? Well, it happened incredibly fast. See, in the middle of the 19th century, the world was having an energy crisis. We were running out of whale oil, which meant light itself was becoming a luxury for the rich. But then, some clever folks figured out how to distill that crude oil goo into kerosene, which was cheap and burned clean. And then, boom, 1859, a guy named Edwin Drake drills the first real commercial oil well, and the American oil rush is on. But here's the part of the story that most people miss. For a while, America wasn't even the king of oil. By 1900, the oil fields around a place called Baku, which was part of the Russian Empire then, were pumping out more than half of all the oil in the entire world. Oil's next big moment wasn't about lighting up homes, though. It was about raw power. Right before World War I, Winston Churchill made one of the biggest bets in history. He decided to convert the entire British Royal Navy, the most powerful military force on the planet, from using reliable British coal to using more efficient but foreign oil. Why? Because it gave their ships more speed and a much longer leash. It was a brilliant military move, but it came at a huge cost. Suddenly, Great Britain was hooked on a resource it couldn't control. And just like that, the Middle East went from being a distant land to the center of a global chessboard. Meanwhile, back in America, the oil boom was just pure, unadulterated chaos. You had these guys rushing into places like Texas, drilling frantically, wasting so much oil, and it was incredibly dangerous. And the reason for all this madness was a really, really weird legal idea that actually encouraged them to be as reckless as possible. But to get it, you have to ask yourself a very simple question. Who did the laws say actually owned all that liquid treasure while it was still buried deep in the earth? The answer the courts came up with was, you know, basically nobody. Yeah, they applied this bizarre legal idea called the rule of capture. They actually decided that oil underground was like a wild animal. It doesn't belong to anyone until you capture it. This set off an insane finders keepers free-for-all. I mean, if your neighbor had oil, you had to start drilling your own well immediately and pump like crazy to suck up as much of that shared pool of oil as you could before he did. It led to these spectacular gushers, just wells exploding, and so much catastrophic waste. Now, out of all that chaos, some order started to form, and with that order came immense power. A small group of massive corporations, which people later nicknamed the Seven Sisters, rose up to dominate the entire global market. Think of them as the descendants of Rockefeller's original Standard Oil monopoly, plus a couple of huge British and Dutch companies. They realized the real prize wasn't just drilling for oil, it was controlling it. And they locked down that control in 1928 when the bosses of these companies all met in secret at Achnacarry Castle up in Scotland. They pretended it was just a hunting trip, but really, they were there to write something called the As-Is Agreement. It was basically a blueprint for a global cartel. The plan was simple: stop competing with each other, fix the prices, set quotas on how much oil gets produced, and basically carve up the world's energy supply just for themselves. And let me tell you, their plan worked like a charm. For decades, this little club of private companies controlled a staggering 85% of the world's known oil reserves. Think about that. They had more say over the global economy than most governments. But, that kind of power never lasts forever. Eventually, the countries that actually sat on top of all this oil got tired of being told what to do. A new idea, resource nationalism, started to sweep across the globe. Basically, countries started taking back control of their own oil, kicking out the foreign corporations, and creating their own national oil companies. They even formed their own cartel, OPEC, and the whole balance of power shifted from boardrooms in New York and London to the capitals of the Middle East and beyond. Then, in the 1970s, another huge shift happened. The United States cut a deal, mainly with Saudi Arabia, that created what we now call the petrodollar system. It's a simple idea, but unbelievably powerful. The deal was, from now on, all oil, no matter who's buying or selling, has to be priced in US dollars. This was genius, because it meant every single country on the planet now needed to get their hands on US dollars to buy energy. It created a permanent global demand for the dollar and basically locked in America's economic dominance for the next 50 years. But here's the really tragic part of the story. For so many of the nations that struck it rich with oil, finding all that black gold turned out to be less of a blessing and more of a curse. There's this deep, deep paradox at the heart of oil wealth. Yeah, economists have even given these traps names. There's the resource curse, where all that easy oil money just fuels corruption and conflict instead of being used to build a real economy. Then there's something called Dutch disease. It's when your currency gets so strong from selling oil that it makes everything else you produce, like crops or manufactured goods, too expensive for anyone to buy, so those industries just wither and die. And finally, you get a rentier state, which is just a fancy way of saying a country that lives off rent from its oil instead of the hard work of its people. All these things together have turned what should be immense wealth into a disaster for so many places. Okay, now for what might be the single weirdest story in the history of oil. Cast your mind back to the spring of 2020. The world locks down, and demand for oil doesn't just drop, it completely evaporates. Nobody's flying, nobody's driving, factories are shut. But you can't just turn off an oil well. The crude kept gushing out. And pretty soon, every single storage tank, every tanker, every pipeline on the planet was filled to the absolute brim. Which led to this. On April 20th, 2020, for the first time in history, the price of a barrel of oil went negative. And not just a little bit. It hit negative $37.63. That means it wasn't just worthless. Producers were literally paying people almost $40 just to take a barrel of their oil. How is that even possible? Well, the logic is actually pretty simple, even if it feels completely backwards. See, if you're a trader and you have a contract that says you have to take delivery of a physical barrel of oil, but there is literally nowhere on Earth to put it, well, the cost to store that oil becomes higher than what the oil is even worth. It was cheaper to pay someone to haul it away than to try and find a storage space that simply didn't exist. The entire market just broke. And, running through all these incredible stories of money and power and weird economics, there's the final bill that's coming due, the environmental one. Our entire modern world is built on petroleum, and it's also the single biggest driver of climate change. Oil and gas alone account for more than half of all energy-related carbon emissions. From the moment it comes out of the ground to the moment we burn it, its impact on our planet is just massive. So the story of oil, from a quack medicine to the engine of our entire world, is one of the most amazing, strange, and important stories in all of human history. It's given us unbelievable progress and power. But as we start to really face the full consequences of that dependency, you have to ask the final question. What is the true ultimate price of black gold? And is it possible we've already paid way too much?